Hello and welcome back. So in the previous video, we saw what is API management. We also saw the 4 important offerings of any API management tool, right? And in the upcoming videos, we are going to learn about API management functionalities offered in Azure and why it's so important for any integration developer to learn, right? So before we do that, let's build an API, right? Let's use the knowledge that we have acquired so far. Let's use the knowledge of using LogicApps and let's build a demo API, right? So we'll build an API and then in the next video, we'll use this API to publish via the API management of Azure, right? So let's go ahead and start building a very basic API using LogicApps. So what we want to do is we want to allow our consumers basically to call our API and pass some text in any language. And the Logic app would be triggered when this request is received. And Logic app would use some of the Azure functionalities, some of the cognitive services with Azure, and would translate that language text into English, and then we would return that as a response back to the consumer, right? So we want to request, in the request we want to receive some text in anything other than English, right? And then in the Logic app we want to translate this into English and send a response back to the caller. So let's go ahead and let's log into the Azure portal. So here we are on the Azure portal, right? And let's go ahead and click on LogicApps. And let's create a new Logic app. And let's select the resource group CI 101, the one that we've created earlier, right? And I'm going to name this API CI 101 language API. Right? And let's create this API. So basically we're building a Logic app, but we will build the Logic app as an API, right? So let's go to resource, and this is the first time when you build the Logic app, it would ask you to choose from one of these existing samples, right? But right now let's go ahead and start with a blank Logic app. Okay, so whenever you want to build an API in the Logic app, right, the first one as part of the API, right, the first trigger should be an HTTP trigger, right? That's when it would become an API, right? So in the trigger, for the first trigger shape, let's search for request. And in the request, you would see this first option, right? Request. And in the triggers, when an HTTP request is received. So let's click on that. Okay. So here, whenever the HTTP request is received, this Logic app would be triggered, right? And as soon as we save this, it will give us the endpoint for that API, right? So let's go ahead and save this for the moment. Okay, so here you go. It has generated the endpoint for this Logic app to be triggered. Right? So let's copy that. And let's go ahead, and this is HTTP post URL, right? So right now we are not defining anything, right? We'll take one step at a time. Right, so we build the API in the Logic app, right? We have the endpoint. Let's go to our postman and let's see if we can test this Logic app, right? So here, let's select the post and I'm going to paste the endpoint, right? And let's hit send. Let's see what happens, right? So here, 202 accepted. And if we go to the Logic app and see the run history, we'll see it has been run once, right? And it was succeeded because it didn't have to do anything. right? It only received the request, right? So that first part is done, right? But we don't want to just receive any request, right? We want to receive a JSON request where there is some text in any other language, right? So let's first create a sample JSON request, right? So in order to define what type of JSON we want to receive here, we need to create a JSON schema. JSON schema is basically a format of the JSON, right? It's the definition of how that JSON file would look like. So either you can, if you have the schema file, you can directly paste it here, or LogicApp also lets you use a sample JSON and create a schema based on that. So let's use that option. So here it says use sample payload to generate the schema. And here I can simply create a sample JSON, right? I'm just going to name it input text as my parameter name. Input text, and here would be some kind of value, right? I don't have to add that right now. I can leave it empty as a string, right? So this is going to be my input JSON, and you see it created the schema already for that JSON, right? Okay, so we have defined what format JSON we want to receive in this API. Now next, what we want to do is we want to pass this to the cognitive services, right? So let's click on the next step. Okay, so in this next action, we want to translate the input language, right? So let's go ahead and search for translate. And when you search for translate, it would give you the options of Microsoft Translator, and there's another version as well. So let's select the latest version, V2. And in the action, you see it says detect language, get languages, and translate text, right? So what we want to do is we want to translate the incoming text into English, right? So let's select the third action, which is translate text. So as always, we need to first create a connection. So I'm going to create con1 translate. Okay, so we've created the connection now. Let's select the target language, right? So we want to translate this into English. So let's select English here. We'll just search for English. Okay, so whatever is the language that we received in, that would be translated into English. And in the text, we want to pass the actual field that we received in the input, right? So that was input text. And as you can see, this dynamic content window is already giving us the option to select this, right? Because this is the field that was received as part of the request parameter, right? So let's select this. And as an output, we want to return whatever is written back from this translate text API. So let's add the next step. And here again, we are going to select this request, because output is nothing but a response back to the caller, right? So because the request was HTTP, and the response is also going to be the HTTP response. So let's click on this request. And now if you see, because we already have one request, right? It's only letting me select the response, right? So let's select the response. And in this response body, whatever was the output of the translate text API, we want to return as is, right? So let's select so here is the translated text, right? Let's select that as an output. And let's save. So here's our API is done. We have just built an API that would receive any language and would return an English translation of that text. So let's go ahead and create let's go ahead and find some text in some non-English language. So again, I'll go back to our favorite Google and sample French text. Let's find something in French, right? And let's see if we can copy some French language text and let's pass that, right? So here we have, okay, I don't know what this is. Obviously, I don't know French, but let's select, this is French, right? Let's go to our Postman and we need to pass the request, right? And the request needs to be in the JSON format. So I'll select JSON here. And if you remember, we have already defined, right? So the input text and the value is where I put my French text, okay? And now let's send this and let's see what happens. All right, here, so if you see this, everyone has a right to education. Education must be free, at least in, okay, so that there we go. This was the exact text that we passed in French. And this is the translated response back in English, right? Let's give it another try. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Google to translate this text into Spanish, right? We have this English text. Let's ask Google to convert this into Spanish for us, right? Google Translate, and I'm going to type in this language here, and I want to translate this into so many languages, right? So let's try Spanish here. Spanish, there we go. Okay, now let's pass this Spanish as an input to our API, right? Here is the input. Okay, so we are passing Spanish as an input. Let's see what we receive back. There we go, exact same thing, right? Let's try some other random language here. Let's see, Serbian. Okay, this is new for me. Let's search and let's see what happens when we pass this Serbian language. Okay, there we go. It's exact same thing, right? So we've just created an API that can accept a line or a paragraph in any language and would immediately return that into an English, right? So it would translate the incoming language into English and would return back. And for your information, the endpoint for this API, right? Let me paste that in the notepad so that we can see that. So here in the logic app, in the trigger, this is our endpoint. So let me paste this endpoint in the notepad so that we can see how it would change when we actually use API management in the upcoming videos, right? So this is how the endpoint currently looks, right? It's a very, a very typical Azure endpoint. It already includes the path and API version and key and date and a lot of things, right? But when you want to ask your outside partners or your consumers or your developers to consume this API, right? You don't want them to know all of the specifics of where this API is built, what is it built upon, whether it's a logic app or not. They don't have to know anything. All they care is that they can pass a text into any language and they would receive English back, right? So stay tuned. In the next video, we are going to publish this API via the Azure API management portal. See you in the next one. Thank you.